Hello, welcome everyone to this session entitled Extending the Senses, Designing Emotional Immersive Experiences with VR Haptics. And this is on behalf of CADRE, the Centre of Art and Design, Research and Experimentation at the School of Art, and on behalf of the newly opened Screen School here at the University of Wolverhampton. So I'll introduce our speaker, Professor Camille Baker, in a moment. But just to do a little bit of housekeeping, this session is being recorded, so please do not share any personal information in the chat. And you'll also see that your sound and video has been disabled. So if you would like to ask any questions during the session, can you please add them to the chat? And I'm sure we'll have time to put those to Camille after her presentation. So by way of introduction, I want to say that this session focuses on a recent project that Camille completed entitled Into Her, an immersive installation that utilizes VR haptics. Camille is a professor in interactive and immersive arts at the University of the Creative Arts in Farnham in Surrey. And she's an artist performer, researcher, and curator within various art forms, including immersive experiences, participatory performance, and interactive art, also mobile media art, tech fashion, soft circuits, DIY electronics, and responsive interfaces and environments, and also emerging media curating. And Camille develops methods to explore expressive, non-verbal modes of communication, extended embodiment and presence in real and mixed reality and interactive art context, using extended reality and haptics, e-textiles, and wearable devices and mobile media. And she writes that she has an ongoing fascination with all things emotional, embodied, felt, sensed, visceral, and relational. So I'm very much looking forward to your talk, Camille, and I'm going to hand over to you now.
So hello, everyone. I'm actually presently not in Surrey. I am living in Crawley near the Gatwick Airport in West Sussex. So I'm coming to you from my office in West Sussex in Crawley. And yes, I think I kind of got the title slightly different. I took it from what I submitted to Denise and then went on the Eventbrite, but this is what I'm using today, Extended Senses using haptics and VR to design emotional immersive experiences. And thank you for that lovely introduction, Denise. So as Denise talked about, sorry about that. I've got kind of a background in a lot of different things, which really means I'm a master of none, but I'm interested in everything, particularly around emerging technologies, performance, and the ways to communicate non-verbally using technology as a conduit or a support. So I've been doing a number of different kinds of projects with different kinds of technologies. I would say my research sits sort of in between space. And as a result, I've been kind of in different kinds of departments, from engineering to graphic design to new media, and now in games, strangely. But I see myself sort of in this weird intersection between art and technology more broadly, often connected to electronics and engineering. So yeah, I'm interested in how different technologies worn on the body can communicate to others using also their technologies. And this involves a whole range of different kinds of activities and that connection with different kinds of disciplines. And so I'm an interdisciplinary artist, you could say. I started off way back when in Canada in dance, and moved swiftly on to learning some 3D, but also curated a gallery with my partner and got involved in early stages of online animation, video production, and started an online community, which was a combination of animation, stories, live videos. Well, they weren't as live as we'd hoped because the technology wasn't quite there at that point, but we tried to explore some of these kind of art forms online, and in the time when the internet was the Wild West everything was happening, but the technological capabilities were quite limited. So we had to work within those limitations. When I went to do my master's at Simon Fraser University in the early 2000s, I worked with Professor Tekla Schifhorst and Dr. Susan Kozel, now Professor Susan Kozel. And we were working with, they were experimenting with ways to pass on body data through these very, very clunky physiological sensing technologies at the time. And you can see this on the left, there's this RFID chip, which is massive, that's embedded into this skirt. And now they're like really, really, really tiny. So this is where I got interested in wearable technologies and how to make performative work that uses cutting edge technology. And meanwhile, I was also doing my master's and exploring ways to make interactive installations using breath, heart rate, and galvanic skin conductive sensing. And the conductive skin sensing is kind of like lie detector. So it's detecting the moisture on the surface of your skin and how that conducts electricity. So I was exploring these different ways in which you can use technology in a live interactive environment using body data to trigger responses using video at the time. I was also involved in different kinds of curatorial. This is showed up a little bit pixelated now because we had to, at the last minute, translate this presentation from Keynote to PowerPoint, so it might have pixelated something. I started an organization called the Escape Artist Society when I finished my master's with a performance art friend, and we were trying to figure out that connection between curating technology-based art and performance. And then I'm swiftly moving through this so that we jump to the meat of the presentation. I came to the UK in 2007, but I started my PhD in 2006. And I was looking at really how to uncover any new understandings of sensations, of liveness and presence that may emerge when using mobile technologies and wearable devices in performance context. And this is the year the iPhone came out. So we didn't have sophisticated video phone technologies at that time. So I was kind of playing around at the edge of what was possible using mobile phones and using video and using the internet to transmit different kinds of videos that I was facilitating. And what I would do would, it's not moving forward. There we go. Jumped over some slides. What I would do is I had to get mobile phones that had video, which were limited at the time, and create these workshops where I had participants first do sort of a relaxation exercise, as you see here, and then I gave them mobile phones and asked them to translate the feelings that were inside their bodies, either emotional or physical, into some kind of video. So I was teaching non-artists how to be kind of video artists on the fly using a mobile phone. And then we collected all those videos and created this, again, quite clunky, very DIY wearable technology system on the body that would collect muscle electricity, again, galvanic skin response, that's what's in the hand there. And at that point, heartbeat or breath, we played around with different sensors and how those live sensations that were being gathered could trigger video in the internet. And the idea was to create participatory performances that were only experienced online, but could take place in real social environments, not necessarily performances. And so there could be this, I wouldn't say subversive, but this performance going on online while a real activity was happening in person, and how those could connect to each other. And this is some stills from some of the videos that were sort of live VJ'd in this context. And then I graduated from my PhD and wanted to know what to do next. And I started working with a woman who is both a choreographer and a media artist, and now associate professor in America, Kate Sicchio. And we created this project that was kind of a multi-project performance research exploration between 2011 and 2018. This image here was the second phase of it. And what we're exploring is wearable technology and sensing devices in dance participatory performance. And so you can see this trajectory from what I was doing in early 2000s with really clunky, really expensive, not easily available technology. Fast forward, 10 years to more readily available DIY sensing technology off the shelf that we could make our own kind of sensing devices using conductive materials and wearable technology in collaboration, I guess you could say, or in conjunction with small electronics and all these what we're calling e-textiles or smart fabrics. We were exploring this idea of novel uses of body data from wearable sensing devices as choreographic or performance material, so that materiality of data. And soon we started to realize there were some other issues which we're now all very aware of, but at the time was just starting to come to the fore around ethics of data collection, how knowledge influences one's sense of identity and how they might express that in performance. And we were making bespoke sensors and smart tech just to kind of explore this research. So it was very DIY in some ways. Simultaneously, we were trying to find ways to share this information with other performance artists, or dancers, theater people. And so we started creating tech workshops for performance artists and theater makers and so on, and trying to teach them how to make their own wearable technologies and e-textiles and different kinds of technologies for performance. In 2015, we did a sort of a residency, and under the guise of HTB 2.0, so this is Hacking the Body 2.0, and what we were doing in this phase is taking what we'd learned in the first phase and trying to put it into an actual performance context. And so we devised 2 different garments and 2 different performances that explored wearable technology and performance, looking at nonverbal communication between the dancers and how they could change the choreography, change the movement through these interactions that may or may not be obvious to the audience. And here's an example of one of the garments we made. And we were exploring things also like how to hack materials and use recycled materials and use already created wearable technologies or sports garments and revise them or re-envision them. So this one was a sports shirt with a wearable device, if you can see on the left, just under the armpit there on the waist. It's measuring heart rate, breath, and has an accelerometer to be able to understand position and rotation. I think also gyroscope. And so we took this garment, we changed the look of it. We had a designer working with us, Tara Boa Mooney, who hacked up the visual look of the garment, but also we took the signal, working with the company Om Signal, to make our own iPad software that would collect that data and then send it back out to our own bespoke system that would play music that responded to the garments and the dancers. So we had these performances in February 2016 in Sheffield and London, and just some images from them. So the one garment, this pink one, was you could crush the sleeves or some other part of the garment, and it had conductive materials, and it would send a signal that the garment is being touched or manipulated in a different way. And then that would send a signal to the other dancer. We actually had 3 permutations: the dancer to themselves, so they would do this, and then they'd feel some vibration on the other part of their body as a response, and then the dancer to the other dancer. And so this was meant to change their choreography and their movement. So one dancer would touch the other person's garment, and then that would send a vibration to the other garment. And the third instance was that the choreographer could change the interaction, and the dancer would have to receive a vibration and respond. We also had a little sort of tickle motor, which had a little feather on it on one of the garments. So we were playing around with different kinds of not only sensing, but actuation or receiving. Whereas this one was really about taking a sort of a structured improvisation and using the breath and heartbeat of one dancer to communicate to the other dancer to change the where the direction or the speed or the pattern of the structured improv that they had already practiced. So it's just different modes of communicating through the garment. And then to make it interesting for the audience, it was also communicating and changing the music so that the audience understood something was happening. Meanwhile, I've also been running this community called the E-Stitches Collective, which is a community of e-textile specialists, e-textiles and wearables. And this is really like meetups, show and tell, and creating space for discussion, Skillshare, networking. And of course, until the pandemic, we were doing these in person. We had all these workshops and all these kind of a little bit higher than beginners. We didn't have tons of beginners because there had been a few years where there were a lot of beginners workshops on how to make e-stitches or e-textile projects. So we were doing more sort of advanced level, and we were getting PhD students, and we were getting artists who were experimenting. And during the pandemic, we were able, actually, it was really good for us. We were able to expand wider and farther. And there's a whole movement of smart materials and e-textiles artists growing all around Europe and the world. So we started to bring in all those people. And now we have 6 chapters around Europe. We kept trying to start one in New York, but that didn't quite happen. But we have 6 chapters around Europe. 2 in the UK, 1 in Ireland, 1 in Berlin, Barcelona, and now in Rotterdam. The downside is that we kept thinking that the pandemic was over and we were going to start having workshops. And that hasn't quite happened yet, but it hopefully will, because there's a lot of really interesting developments happening in this space. It's this weird, again, that weird connection between art and engineering, which is really interesting, and interaction design. I got pulled into another completely different kind of project, which was interesting, that was happening in new music, sort of contemporary, the opposite of classical music, but still in that kind of space, new music. And they were exploring ways in which things need to change, and they pulled me in as their technology advisor. So that was very interesting to do something completely kind of outside my range. And meanwhile, I've been involved in a couple of books. One was co-edited by my longtime collaborator, Kate Sicchio, and that was released that same year that we'd finished all those the performances of our Hacking the Body work. And then 2 years later, I finished kind of a rewrite of my PhD thesis, but also a complete upgrade. It almost felt like doing my PhD all over again, because I had to narrow the focus to focus more on performance and how mobile phones have changed since my PhD, because so much had happened. There's a problem with technology. If you do a PhD in technology-based work, you have to really rethink it if you ever want to use that work as the basis of a book. And so all the theory was still there, but all the examples of work and textual review and that kind of thing had to change, because so much had changed. So it was really about mobile phone being used in music, in performance, in, of course, VR and AR, and in other kinds of permutations where people are connecting wearable devices with the mobile phone. So that came out in 2018, and then just some images from it, because I was looking at kind of cutting edge ways of working with a mobile phone using either VR or AR, or playing with what is a VR headset, or what is it that what is it you might want to layer on top of dance and performance. So some, yeah, just different kinds of works. And then a couple of years ago, I guess it is almost 2 years, a year and a half ago, I think actually, I released a chapter on sort of the more dangerous or the more contentious issues around how technology companies are trying to move closer into the body and collect more and more data from inside the body through injectables, embeddables, and of course wearable technologies, and where that connection is between the creative side and the technological advancements and the data and ethical issues. But then again, also how artists and performers and designers can actually be involved in that conversation and change where we're going with these technologies. Just to shift focus, because I know that this is a university crowd, and so I just wanted to kind of tell you very briefly about some of the things that are theoretically interesting to me. While I see myself as primarily a practitioner, obviously it's driven by certain elements of technology and some of it philosophy and what's happening at the moment. So the things that have always really interested me since my PhD is this idea of connection, nonverbal connection, and that's really come to the fore through the pandemic. So that seems like it, it's come up again in a different way. And so while it's still kind of my area, I also had to adapt to what does it mean in pandemic modalities or pandemic contexts. Embodiment, how do we embody our technologies? How do we, how am I translating my presence and liveness to you through this device when I can't see you and I know you're there, but I can't communicate with you. And through haptics and various interfaces, I'm interested in that viscerality, that how can we communicate touch and other aspects of body senses through our devices? How do we extend our senses and what is going on beyond the skin and through affect and touch and different things? I've always been interested in telepathy, real and simulated. Both my MA and my PhD have been really about exploring that idea of telepathy, consciousness, dreams, that kind of thing, and how people can communicate through their consciousness. Whether you believe it's real or not, I've been really fascinated in that. Other interests, like I said, about identity and how we express ourselves through data, and that comes out through these issues of privacy. And we've got so many other issues on the plate now with climate change and sustainability, and how we can be responsible and have a sense of stewardship over our planet. And really, it's difficult with technology because technology is both the problem and the solution, and very much the problem. And so this is a new dimension which I'm starting to think about and want to bring more and more into my thinking and my practice. So again, just sort of just tease this out a little bit. For me, I've been really interested in the work of a few theorists. So Don Iady, I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but has said that embodiment is the entanglement of mind and body as one, encased within the skin, enveloping the bones, blood, brain, other organs, fluids, and tissues. But it can also include this elastic ability of the mind to move beyond the boundaries of the skin, and for one to be able to send one's presence across distance. And not quoted here, but Rupert Sheldrake is a controversial biologist, and I've always been interested in his ideas of how animals know when their owners are coming home, and how animals can send warning signals across miles. How do they do that? So I'm kind of interested in that boundary of what we know and what we don't know around the ability to move our consciousness around. And this idea of embodiment being both inside and outside, crossing the senses and functioning separately, entirely outside of the mind, and vice versa, in an elastic sense, not detached entirely from the body. And then Varela and his colleagues talked about consciousness and cognition being dependent on the body and its embedded context. Even if the mind wanders, it's pulled back to the body. So this is really interesting for haptics, because it's this kind of idea of like, how can you use this interface to extend the mind and the body, and how also can they always come back to the body. Yeah, so embodiment being in the body and this mind-body integration, but sensing and beyond it, exploring other modalities like in dreams and altered states, virtual technological spaces, and other modes of consciousness. How sensing and is part of this technological context. And ID says the ultimate, sorry, this is being covered up by Zoom. The ultimate goal of virtual embodiment is to become the perfect simulacrum of full multisensory bodily interaction. So this is contentious. Can we not shift our perception and extend our senses? So these are kind of interesting ideas that I like to play with. Technological embodiment is a form of non-corporeality within the virtual connection and digital mode of extended mind, says Beauregard and O'Leary, through the projection or by sending the consciousness through technology as a conduit. So these are all the kind of ideas that I'm quite interested in. And from my book, before that, another quote was, there's no physiological definition of sensation, and more generally, there's no physiological psychology, which is autonomous because a physiological event itself obeys biological and psychological laws. Sense experience is a vital process, no less than procreation or breathing. So this is again that connection that I'm really interested in the body and our perception. And so I put in my book, I'm proposing that we can extend our minds and bodies. We cannot climb into another mind or experience the world through another body's perception to confirm our own. We can only empathize, communicate, and share experiences with other people while forming a collective and shared understanding of objective reality based on our individual, subjectively perceived embodied experiences. Of course, this is also coming from other forms of science. I'm also interested in Brian Masumi's work, and he has a lot of theories around proprioception based on physics and biology, and a lot on Merleau-Ponty's work as well. And he looks at inner body senses relevant to biosensing, wearable and skin-based devices. And this is interesting for my practice in relation to touch and haptic technologies. And he says, there are other modes of perception, such as proprioception, defined as the sensibility proper to the muscles and the ligaments, as opposed to tactile sensibility and visceral sensibility. Tactility is the sensibility of the skin as a surface of contact between perceiving subject and perceived object, enveloping the skin's contact with the external world. So I put my emphasis in there. So their senses are experienced through translation of perceptions and physical response, or like a relay of experiences, and eventually are conscious and felt both physically and emotionally. So much of the performance and dance work using wearable technology, including my own, and currently as well as in the past, tries to exploit this idea of translation of experiences and adding movement as another physical response to this relay. And he also says proprioception translates the exertions and ease of the body's encounters with objects into a muscular memory of rationality. And the immediacy of visceral perception is so radical that it can be said without exaggeration to precede the extroceptive sense and sense perception. So crucial here is the notion that senses are experienced through the translation of perceptions and physical response, or further translation, like a relay of experiences that are eventually conscious and felt both physically and emotionally. Okay, that's a repeat. Sorry about that. Presence is another really crucial part of the work. As I said, like, how do I feel your presence? How do you feel mine? And it can be defined as an embodied physical or virtual engagement of otherness and others elsewhere in time and space. And more this discussion about time and space is also up for grabs. So because in the past it was, well, liveness has to happen at a specific time in a specific place, or at least a specific time. But with the internet, of course, that shifts everything, because we can have multiple times, multiple spaces, and we're still somehow here connected in this moment, or this virtual encounter. but it encompasses a physical, conceptual, lived sensibility like a vibration or a physical agitation, a viscerality and felt intuitively, a togetherness without having to be in the physical space or place, but with an awareness of another, simultaneous intuition of another person, their involvement in mutual activity or space, virtual or in person, can be experienced as a meeting or ascending of one's extended consciousness or awareness of self or other via invisible, non-corporeal embodiment, possibly just the knowledge that you're there somewhere. While the flesh is not directly stretched over the distance, the mind and body are engaged by both parties through extended embodiment experienced when one is fully involved, actively, intellectually, emotionally, playfully in an activity with others and can feel them in that experience. So moving swiftly on, that was the theory portion of my talk. And so I'm trying to say that I'm bringing all these things, these thoughts and these, musings with me in all the projects that I'm doing. In front of you here is more recent work, more curatorial. I've done a lot of different kinds of curatorial work, mostly outside the context of the traditional, white box kind of gallery space, but in other contexts. And this one, as I've been involved in a project called the STARTS ecosystem for the past 2 years, which is all about bringing artists and technologists together to collaborate. One of the sort of offshoots or side opportunities was creating a virtual space as part of Ars Electronica for a number of UK organizations to come and show their work. And Wolverhampton was part of that last year, I guess a year and a half ago in 2020 as Ars Electronica 2020, where we had what Ars Electronica called Kepler Gardens, which was all these different sort of hot spots around the world at the same time-ish. Not the exact same time, but in the same plane, I guess, of existence and virtual existence together, and virtual presence in these little places, something like 200 countries or locations around the world were hosting activities during the second week of September to the end of the first week of September into the second. And we did it again this year with different organizations. It just says University of Creative Arts. That's because I badly failed to include some of the other organizations. We had 7 last year, I think, and we had another 6 or so this year. Different organizations primarily, and just bringing them into one kind of portal to send out to the world. This is our UK garden. Last year, a year and a half ago again, I was involved in an online residency, which was a 6-week residency with this other artist to explore this idea of how do you perform and how do you rehearse and how do you think about a collaboration where you're only allowed to work together online, to think about things online, to research online, and then finally perform live online. And so we did this project called Intangible Threshold, investigating the meaning of connection over distance through screens. Very, very pandemic 2020. Also, in 2020, I created a virtual gallery, and I'm now saying that I'm not impressed with virtual galleries, but I tried it. Someone who is a kind of a pioneer of wearable technology and fashion, Valérie Lamontagne, died conveniently before the pandemic in October 2019 after fighting and winning bone cancer. Her own immune system killed her in the end. And she was an amazing artist and designer. And she kind of, we were meant to try to make a physical exhibition of her work at ISEA in 2020. And again, because of the pandemic, it didn't happen. And so I was determined that we were going to do something in her honor, because it was, it was a tragedy that she died and there was no celebration really of her work. And so I pulled together a number of different pieces of her work and had an online, and it was up, actually, I said till present, but it was up until about Christmas this year, and I decided to let it go. I mentioned STARTS project. I've been involved in this project around helping artists collaborate with scientists and vice versa, and corporations also bringing in in-house artists. Oh, sorry, that had some kind of a mind of its own. But also simultaneously, a year and a bit ago, I was working on a project around collaborating with a small company developing a haptic glove. It took a little longer than they expected. I think they're still trying to develop it, but myself and my colleague Brigitte Hosea worked with Ivan Azakov to try to explore ways in which we could make virtual reality applications to work with haptic gloves in VR space to do sculpting. And here's an example of one of his prototypes. And so at the end of this really short little residency, we had, he devised an application, and we user tested it, and he created this haptic tool that still needs some work, but I think it's the direction of where things are going. Also in 2020, I started a research group at UCA exploring this connection between the senses and technology. And I opened it up because we have many different kinds of people at UCA. So opened it up for architects and filmmakers, as well as people who are working at this cutting edge of haptics and immersive technology, to performers, to a range of different people in our school and across campuses, across courses. And we have a very dedicated group of about 20 people across lecturers, practitioners, and PhD students. And we're about to launch, and I'll send the call to Denise when we're ready, a call for papers and performances and or artworks for a symposium we're having in September this coming year, also called the Extended Senses Symposium. So to the meat. I think I've talked too long, and I said I'd be faster than this, but I'm also been told by Denise I have lots of time. So here we are. I wanted to talk of an example of a work that I finished in really May 2021, worked on, started in a really slow state in 2019, just before the pandemic, and then the pandemic sort of slowed everything down. We did a prototype by August 2020, and then got extra funding from the Arts Council lottery fund to make a proper full VR piece. So it's called Into Her, and it's around the intimate journey inside a woman's reproductive system, and it's intended to be an immersive, intimate, haptic experience that takes participants inside the female body to explore lesser understood reproductive and post-reproductive diseases such as fibroids, polyps, endometriosis, cysts, and cancers. And it's emotionally based on my own and other female family and friends' experiences. I had ovarian cancer, and I was incredibly lucky. I had a tumor in my ovary. They took that out, and then they did a secondary surgery to find out if I had it in the other one. And I was lucky. It had not spread. And I was one of the very rare cases, because ovarian inevitably kills most people because they don't catch it in time. But I was one of the very lucky people who was something like 5% or something that actually survived it because we caught it early. And so from that experience and going through the NHS, who were fantastic in many ways, I wanted to share my experience of dealing with something like this. And it's not really against the NHS in particular, because I had a good experience with them, but it's more about the larger medical system and medical approach to women's health. And so I collected a number of stories from various women all around that I could get a hold of around Europe and America and Canada. And I also had pulled a few excerpts from 2 books that I felt were really relevant. One was a really primary source, was Woman in Intimate Geography. And I'll just say right here, neither of these are considered academic books, but they're really important books for women. And this is really a kind of like it's like taking scientific biology and putting it in language that people can understand. So it's science writing about the internal workings of the female body, but it's written in such a poetic and playful way that it may, and visual way. I mean, there's no visuals in the book, but she describes everything so amazingly visually both the good and the bad, that it just begged to be used. And I accidentally found it, because when I was going through all this, I realized I must have picked it up at a secondhand place somewhere, because I had this used book on my shelf, read it eagerly, and thought, oh, this is the book I need to base a lot of my sort of ideas from. So not all the excerpts got into the books, but it had a huge impact on the visuals and a lot of other elements of the piece. And then another book that I did take some excerpts from was Invisible Woman Exposing Data in a World Designed for Men. Incredible book, really looking at just how the whole world, in every single discipline, in every single aspect of life, is not designed for women. Women are considered other. And I took the stories that were talking specifically about reproductive health and how women often don't get the care that they need. So the piece is about female identity, you know, body image. How do you feel about losing parts of your body, and how does that, you know, feel like a bit of a betrayal, and issues around treatment and surgery and getting the right information, and just a number of different feelings that happen when you're going through these kinds of health issues. I based the work on visually kind of on some really fun work. One is the actress Rosario Dawson made this installation for Burning Man in 2011. And this is just the front part. Of the back side is really hilarious. It's kind of a male reproductive system kind of catching on the other side. It's a very funny piece. So if you're curious, go look it up. Rosario Dawson's Misting Vagina, really funny looking piece. And then a South African artist, Reshma Chiba, did this walk-in vagina tunnel, which I thought was quite fun as well. A lot of this is kind of, you know, trying to demystify the female body a little bit. I also was influenced by, indirectly, the aesthetic and the ideas of what's called the red tent movement, which started in the US, but seems to be here too. It's a bit of a new age movement, how women can bring in their daughters into womanhood by taking them into this sort of red tent sharing experience where they talk about periods and things like that. But also there was a book that I was given as a young woman by my stepmother called Our Bodies Ourselves. And it was a book about women's health written by women because no one else was writing it. So very anecdotal, but it became more scientific over time. It's in its like 35th year or something. It's a massive tome now. And again, it comes from women doctors and women nurses and women, you know, what are they called, to help with babies? Anyway, so lots of different things I got it from. I also, you know, how do you get inside your own body in a non-graphic way? I opened up my mouth, took a picture and went, oh, there, yeah, okay, how are we gonna get the right aesthetic here? So I got connected to this amazing designer, Mafjeh Alvarez, who's an artist in her own right. And we started experimenting with 3D and working in Unity, and played around with what do these body parts look like, and how, you know, what should we be going for? Should they be shiny like this image, or should they be different? And should it be anatomically correct? And should it be, you know, really grotesque and graphic? We decided against that. And some early sort of interaction designs that I created to think about, you know, how we're going to move through the space, and then a more sophisticated one around what are we going to, you know, what is the interaction, what is the sound, what is it that we're experiencing at what points, and, you know, is it really going to be, as you can see from this diagram, it's not going to be anatomically correct at all. And, you know, how do we make people go through this journey in a way that is going to be sensitive, not gross, you know, gruesome, all these different things. So trying to find a balance between factual and relatable, and emotional, and yeah, somehow connecting to reality. So then I brought in a student of mine who was an MA student, finished in games, a beautiful illustrator, did some really interesting work for her MA project using tilt brush and VR kind of animation. So I asked her if she would be interested in helping us make some of the assets for the piece. And so this is one of her mood boards for the project, and the different colors of different parts of the story and the different organs, and you know, some more white, some more pink and more red, and you know, the nuances there and the different sides of parts of the body and different part of the journey. So this is my core team. Yes, I had a few other people come in later on. But my core team was Mafj is how you say it, Alvarez, media artist, Unity designer, and we worked most closely together for the 1.5 years. Then we brought in fashion designer and electronics, sometimes electronics interaction designer, Bushra Bird, a friend of mine who actually focuses more on environmental and climate change, sound art, to do sound design. And then my student, Sarah Butner, to do the tilt brush and concept art work. We did end up having a Unity programmer help us with the connection between the haptic and the headset. And I had to actually rip out all the haptics and redo them after we did our user testing and get them redone by another engineer, because some of the connections weren't working properly. You don't need to really see this, but it's just an example of, I had to talk about this in another talk about all the different things that had to be finalized near the end, and how we had to deal with all these different things. Because there's 3 components. There's the tent, which is a physical, actual thing. There's the haptic, and then there's the VR, and they all had to work together. So I'll move on from that. Some of the early tilt brush images that Sarah came up with. An early sort of drawing that I did of different possibilities for the haptic. So on the right was what I wanted, this ultimate corset that measured breath and heartbeat and had some different motors and prickle motors and a vibe motor and a heat. That wasn't going to happen. It became clear that we didn't have the engineering team and we didn't have the time or the money to make that happen. So we went with the one on the left, and it's not exactly like this image, but sort of connected to this image. And Bushra did, again, a mood board, like what do we want it to look like? Is it going to be kind of like being under the sea, sort of coral reef kind of idea, which is what we were kind of looking at. Again, everything about both the imagery inside the VR and the garment itself was meant to evoke sort of natural world, organic entities, I guess you could say, or organic elements. And here's an early prototype of the haptic, and then the final version. And all you can't see the electronics because they're all tucked up inside, and you have them coming from above the pubic bone to just below the belly button, and then around the sides, so that at different stories you've got the vibration happening, being triggered at different parts of the body, where underneath the skin and inside the body those organs would be living and be experienced, the pain and the issues would be experienced. Again, an early sketch, a really, really early sketch. I was trying to find software that was good for like quick sketches, and there was just not a lot of great stuff out there. There is now, but time has changed. But essentially, this is what I wanted to have happen. People are welcomed. So there's not just putting on a headset. It's a whole kind of, as somebody said, it's kind of a whole staged experience. Somebody's welcomed, they're fitted with a haptic, they're told how to use the headset, they enter, they sit down, they're in a very kind of womb-like environment that's welcoming and comforting. They put the headset on, they're going through the experience, they come out, they discuss it, and we have some material from health organizations about what's going on in case they need some extra support or information. I engaged a bouncy castle company to design the tent, and originally I was going for some kind of geodesic dome tent, but then I realized that wasn't A, very portable, B, very affordable, and C, very private or very conducive to the experience, and I guess D, hard, not soft and squishy like a womb. So I will get to the pictures, but I just want to say some of the places it's shown so far. So as part of, when we're still kind of in lockdown, it was part of a virtual exhibition that ended up being relaunched. And I didn't even put, oh yes, I did at the bottom. So it was once as part of a showcase of the National Gallery X, and then it was part of the Kensington Kensington and Chelsea Art Week. Then it was part of Ars Electronica. So this is the online version. And I also did some VR walkthroughs online at IZEA and Eva and Ars Electronica. No, not IZEA, sorry, Ars Electronica and Eva. And then I did the first physical showing in Folkestone in June. And so here's some images. This is inside the tent. And I kind of mix the different events that it's participated in, just so you see different kind of examples of people and the inside of the space. And then this is on the right, you've got this, I got it into this really cool parking garage, but there was nowhere to put all the headsets to charge them and to clean them, because I had to clean them. I had this rigorous COVID risk assessment that I had to do as well. So I had all these headsets sitting in the corner, all plugged in and ready to be cleaned in between people, and the corsets are sitting on top of the headsets. So yeah, and then on the outside, it looks like this. And so you can see the different spaces it was in. So this one is in Folkestone in a massive proper white gallery space. And then on the far left, it's in a small yoga studio. This is where we did our testing. And then in November, it was in a shopping mall in a store for the Neon Festival, their Wired Women theme. And then in Brighton, it was in this parking garage that's turned into a gallery space for the Brighton Digital Festival. So it's kind of been in lots of different spaces and situations. I had a visitor do a drawing of it, which was quite beautiful. And it's got quite a lot of publicity now, various places around the UK. And it also went to Sheffield, and as I said, Brighton Digital and Neon Festival upcoming. I'm taking it to Toronto as part of the Art Sci salon of University of Toronto's festival. They haven't told me the name of their festival, but anyway, it's about, I think it's about women and reproductive health. I'm negotiating with an organization in Edinburgh to take it back up to Scotland. I was going to be going to the Margate Power of Women Festival, but they couldn't find the space that they had for me couldn't accommodate it any longer, because it had been carved up into small spaces. So they're going to find another opportunity in the summer to take it to Margate. So it's traveling around, trying to get it into London somehow. And just a sample of the different things people have said. I don't know if you can see this. People like the storytelling. People like the VR experience, people like the full kind of exploration from real to virtual and back again. People like the content. And it got in as far as being shortlisted for the Lumen Prize in 2021. And I have a short clip. Do I have time to show the clip, Denise?
Oh, yes, definitely.
Okay, so this is about 5 minutes. It is kind of pixelated. I apologize for that, because we had to translate it from Keynote to PowerPoint. And it's a trailer of the piece, which, as one visitor told me, the trailer doesn't do justice to the experience. And I've got to keep trying to get a better trailer, but it's hard to get a screen capture from inside the headset that translates. So this one has a bit of a small screen version of a box and a bit of a widescreen. So forgive that as well, but you get a sampling of what's inside. I didn't want to do a trailer that showed too much anyway, because I didn't want people to see too much. I wanted it to be a surprise. But yes, I had one visitor in Brighton tell me off and say, I almost didn't come because the trailer isn't as good as the piece, but I'm so glad I did. It's a great experience. So I hope you get to see it at some point. Maybe I'll take it up to Birmingham if Denise helps me out with that, or actually I'm working with somebody else on that as well. So hopefully you'll be able to see it sometime in the future. But here's a sample, plus some responses from people who saw it in the test stage.
Welcome to the Into Her project. The experience created here is meant to introduce you to phenomena that is experienced by a great number of women in their late 30s, sometimes earlier, and in their 40s, and sometimes after menopause, even into their 50s and 60s. Every day and often misdiagnosed or even ignored, and sometimes leading to surgeries or death. The female body and its reproductive system are wondrous, giving life to other humans, and also providing pleasure, and so much more along the way. As Natalie Angier, the author of some of the stories shared here, says in the introduction of her book Woman, the female body deserves a Dionysian respect, a state of body not easily won. For the female body has been abominably regarded over the centuries. It has been made too much of or utterly ignored. It has been conceived as a second sex, the first draft, the faulty sex, the default sex, the consolation prize, the succubus, the male interrupts. We are lewd, prim, bestial, ethereal. We have borne more illegitimate metaphors than we have unwanted embryos. Woman, the bowl, the urn, the cave, the musty jungle. We are the dark mysterium. We are the hidden folds and primal wisdom. As such, this is a journey into the dark mysterium, for a start to understanding the mystery, the unknown experiences, the unnameable sensations, the pain and the misunderstandings, to find a language or a pathway to knowing more about things that happen inside us.
I think it's magical, it's informative, it's really surprising, all these different veils and all these graphic representations. I think the immersion is, it's kind of poetic, it's a soundscape, but it's also, there's a documentary element to it. Yeah, it's a really strong work, really strong work.
Well, I love the tent because it really added to the experience of being immersed. I felt very safe in there. Sometimes I don't feel safe when I go into VR because I think I might knock something over or trip over, and I felt very safe in that environment. I felt very comfortable in the seat. Yeah, I thought it was great.
So the content was actually enlightening. It definitely are topics I'm not used to think about. I had no idea that women are going through this kind of odysseys in their daily life between 30s and 45 or 50s. I like the different voices and the fact that apart from who is not anymore with us, we actually use original voices, I guess.
It was really interesting, really thorough, and I think that it addresses an issue that is not well known, and I think that many more women in different age ranges should be aware of this. And I think that there is some sort of taboo and a stigma within society, so we definitely need to share this. I think it could be a great educational tool, and I would encourage people of all ages, that especially if they are women, but also if there are fathers, brothers or uncles, to watch this and inform their relatives.
Being inside the vagina was very interesting. It was really soothing, really calming. Actually, since we're at the tail end of the pandemic, it's a perfect place to go. The visuals were absolutely stunning. I mean, it's something unexpected. You're going along this visceral journey, navigating intimate stories about people's experiences with their own health when it comes to women's health. But the problem is with women's health, it's navigated mostly by external forces and very little by the women's intuitive experiences. Our stories are not being listened to. So when you get to the end of this particular piece, is that, you know, it is very, very simple. Just listen.
Of course, it felt really supportive, and I felt safe going in, really comfortable, but really, really great stories. Really nice to hear the women's voices and different individuals' stories. Very comforting feeling being inside, and all the visuals, it seemed to match really well, and it just felt really cosy. So coming out, I feel quite kind of like I've been hugged, a bit nourished from the inside. It feels really quite good. Yeah, but it is really like you do feel immersed in it. You feel within, but so familiar because being a woman. And hearing stories and being inside, it really feels really familiar and warm and inviting. I feel quite rested.
And just to say, that was during the testing phase, so that wasn't when we had the haptic working properly. After that, I have a lot of pages of feedback about the haptic as well, and helping people connect back to their bodies after, and which is kind of what this is all about for me. And this talk is supposed to be about, really, it's connecting women back to their bodies, and men too. I've had people crying. I've had people, in some ways for me, the men's stories, not that they were better or more powerful, but they were different. And the women's stories were very much, yes, I can totally relate to this. It felt good to know where these things are in the body with the haptic. Men, I had one man say, should be more aggressive. I want to know what it really feels like. And I was like, do you? And others, you know, some there was a couple women who it was a bit triggering for them. They recently had hysterectomy, so they felt, oh, it wasn't painful, it just made them really emotional. So there's been a lot of different responses, but I just wanted you to hear it from the actual people who saw some of it. So I'm going to stop it there. So Denise, you can come.
I'm here. Oh, that was amazing, Camille. And I know your work, but I learned so much through that presentation. And it was quite funny to think back that 15 years is so historic now. The iPhone in 2006. So yeah, I suppose that's true, that technology moves so swiftly on. So I've just put a little note in the chat if anybody had any questions. So we'll hopefully wait for some questions, but I have a couple of questions, because I've read something of what you said about Into Her. And you said initially it was framed within a kind of techno-feminist framing, but that you actually moved away from that. Could you explain?
Yeah, I mean, I guess on the one hand, I was really interested in different approaches to thinking about the body. And I suppose I might go back to those now that I've had the experience of making and creating this, but it became, to me, that became really sort of an intellectual box to, or let's say square hole to put a round peg in. Well, maybe that works. No, the other way around, a round hole to put a square peg in, because on some level, in reality, that's not really what drove it. I wanted that to be what drove it, but what drove it was listening to the stories of actual women talking about their experience, which was not very intellectual, it's very emotional. And I felt to give them fair space, and not just the women whose stories are collected, but the women in the group who were designing the project were all going through similar experiences while we were designing it. In fact, we were having those conversations alongside, you know, where do we put this asset, which was really powerful in lots of ways, because it meant that the women who were designing it from a place of being able to relate to what they were designing, not some abstract visual concept or intellectual concept. And so it made sense to me that we go with what we felt needed to happen, rather than trying to place, trying to layer some philosophy or theory that didn't work. Well, it doesn't not work, but it didn't have a place at that time, if that makes sense. I'm now in a place where I can step back from it and revisit that work and say, oh, actually, does it actually fit, or are there things that I agree with or don't agree with? So I feel like I was too emotionally, personally engaged with it, but also all of us were emotionally engaged with the topic, that we couldn't put this intellectual frame on it. And I certainly felt that it was fake to do that. And that now I could probably step back and rethink that and look at it again and see if it works or if it fits. And I think some of it does and some of it doesn't, but particularly around, you know, ideas of where the role of technology in the body. But I think I have more political goals at this moment, where I feel like the goal really is to, I had sex educators and other people come to me and say, we need to get this into a program of educating young doctors or young people in schools, or, you know, so I think I've transferred my ideas from philosophical, conceptual to very, which have their own political dimension, absolutely, but to a much more political place where, you know, I want to create a petition that has, that hopefully gets 100,000 signatures, is around how government should put more energy into educating girls, educating GPs, and funding research. And some funding has been happening, but more needs to be happening. Because I've heard about things like women researchers putting forward research proposals around, you know, looking at endometriosis more closely, which apparently affects 1 in 10 women, recent statistics. So, and being rejected for that funding because it was too niche. Well, 1 in 10 is not niche. It's just not 1 in 10 men. So I've become a little, and I guess, political differently, less intellectually, more emotionally, I suppose.
We have one question in the chat, but I just want to kind of follow this through because of what you're saying. And I read that somebody was very interested in you kind of translating this experience to other kind of scenarios, other kind of biological issues, etc.
Yeah.
But to me, and I'm quite intrigued, and we've talked before about Char Davis and Osmos, but what she says, you know, is that it has to be well, 2 questions. One, how significant is the VR for you? Because is this the first time you've really used VR?
Well, made a VR piece.
Made a VR piece. So the significance of that space, because she writes that actually, because it has to be the best way to explore immersive space is through body-centered interfaces. And she suggests that actually that makes it inherently female because this focus. There's a little quote that I had: such emphasis on the body's essential role in immersive virtual space may be inherently female. And she wrote that in 1998. So yeah, over 20 years ago.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to say that, but what I would say is that as we move into more development into work that connects the body, I mean, I'm teaching classes where I'm showing videos from people who are making these haptic suits, whether it be Tesla or be Haptics, and their imagination is, personally, I think, very limited, because they just think the whole role of engaging the body is so that people can feel like they're actually getting hit by real bullets when they're in a first-person shooter. And for me, that just sort of misses the point. But yeah, I mean, the VR works on its own without the haptic, but as reported by visitors, it becomes a much richer, deeper, more emotional, more fully engaged experience with the haptic. And I've even had people say that it's also, you know, the VR is 1/3 of the project, which really it kind of is. The VR is important because you get those stories that are visual. Well, they're initiated visually, but they're audio. I mean, the richness of the piece is really audio. When I started the project, I actually thought maybe we would just wander around in the dark and listen to these emotional stories. And Maf J, the designer I was working with, said, well, no, I think you should make it something more. And fair enough, yeah. So the journey is really, as you heard from some of those testimonials, which, by the way, I didn't prompt any of those people. I just asked them to tell me their thoughts. And but haven't had any negative responses. And the most positive ones were connecting the content to the body. So I think whether it be female primarily, I think it might be the female part is just that women are more connected to their bodies because we have all these things go on inside them. So we just have a larger sensitivity to our bodies, perhaps. It doesn't mean the men can't experience that either or don't get it, because all the men that have come and experienced Into Her have all said that, oh, it was really a lot more emotional. It pulled them, I guess, it pulled them out of the intellectual and back into their body, which inherently became a more emotional experience. We can listen to things and we can disconnect from them, but when we're pulled back into the body, that emotional outcome is amplified. And so that's what I heard from people, that it was, you know, there were, for example, there was a case where a couple of times where one of the haptics wasn't working. So there'd be 3 people in the space, but one person didn't have the haptic, and they shared their experience. And going in, the person who didn't they still wore the corset, because I think there's still something haptic about wearing it anyway. Like that woman said in the video, her corset didn't even have the vibration, but she felt hugged by the corset. So there's still something haptic about having that on, even if it had no vibration in it. But the people who didn't have it, when they were in the same space with people who did have it, said, yeah, yeah, they liked it and they still got something from it, but it wasn't the same as their peers were expressing much more. They were just expressing much more. They were feeling more. They were touched more by it. They were touched, right? Yeah. Literally. Yeah. So I think yeah. I can't really comment about whether it's, I don't want to say that it's more female, because I really want men to see this, and I feel that men could easily get more engaged with their bodies if we have more haptic VR experiences.
Okay, so to follow on from that, this is from Jane Webb from the School of Art. She says, I'm interested in the haptic sculpture. Can you explain a little bit more about that? What are people actually sculpting? Is it
yeah, okay.
Okay, and just to finish, is it the sort of technology that would be useful for accessing archives of objects virtually?
Well, not the one that he's building. The one that he built is literally so you can sculpt virtual clay into virtual faces and virtual but what he did do with that, which was interesting, is he made it so you could 3D print it and make it an actual object as opposed to just a virtual object. But the archiving part, we're not advanced enough yet to get there. That would be another stage. You could, I can put you in touch and you can suggest that. But the tool right now, I mean, there are several VR sculpting tools. They're all in various stages of complexity and interesting, like complexity and quality, I suppose you could say. Like, but the difference between those and his is you can actually feel the tactility on your fingers. You can actually feel what you're sculpting. And so that's the innovation. And where we are right now is we're doing small innovations, not big ones. So me just making something with vibration, even though it doesn't seem very sophisticated from a haptic innovation standpoint, it is, I'm working on a new project bid, and the woman who I'm working with is an engineer who works on haptics. And she said, sometimes just the small innovation is huge. Yeah. So we're not at that place yet, but the fact that you were able to feel the sculpture and then you can print it, it does still have a physicality that's something.
So, okay, that's brilliant. So there aren't any other questions at the moment. I know that somebody who had to leave is really interested, I think might be interested in hearing a little bit more about the e-stitches, and you're saying about the kind of contemporary developments in e-stitches. Could you say a little bit about that?
Well, there's been so many that I can't actually pinpoint one in particular, but we have people who come in and talk about new, like there was a woman who did her PhD on making a version on a very small scale of invisibility cloak, being able to create technologies where they're like mini mirrors and they're embedded in the materials so that they can make something, they reflect basically, so that they can make whatever's behind them disappear. There are people who come and show works in soft robotics and how to use sort of more, soft robotics being working with kind of semi-organic materials and putting electronics in them to be able to move and change. We've got people who are working with biomaterials and making biomaterials in itself, like growing fabrics is an innovation, even though there might not be an electronics in it. There's a lot of technology in trying to find new and different ways of growing and making sustainable and biodegradable materials. So there's a range of different people who participate, and then there's sort of more traditional kind of textiles artists that work with conductive threads and, you know, making. There's one woman who specializes in making sort of haptic pillows, where they're kind of like instruments for kids, so different places they touch, it makes different sounds. And so there's just a range of people who are sort of more into the industry and commercial dimension. There's people who are much more in the experimental research dimension. There are people who are coming from dance and performance, or people who are coming from engineering. So we have a range of different people, and every time, like we've got a website, it needs a little updating, called e-stitches.co.uk. And we are completely nonprofit. We have no income, we have no funding. So everything happens when it happens. That's why the website needs to be updated. But we've had over 100 speakers over the since 2014. And in the fact that we only meet, you know, every 6 weeks to 2 months, and we usually have 2 or 3 speakers or workshops. We have such a range of amazing projects. And if you follow the Flickr, you'll see some of the images, the work that people were presenting and showing. There's a range of really exciting stuff there. Like I say, from commercial to research to art to engineering, and it's really interesting. And there's always something, some new thing happening. Sometimes there's projects that have been funded by EU projects, like the Where Sustain project I was leading, or the STARTS project, where there's projects that started in one project, got some more funding, evolved, started doing something different, evolved again into something else. So we've seen the progression of people's practice, you know, from very experimental to very commercial. So there's lots of really interesting work there, and I can't pull down one in particular. Well, I probably could, but you know, there's so many amazing ones. I would just say go to the website and take a look at what we've got there, and I hope to update it again soon with some more images and some more links to the artists and designers and engineers that we've had present there.
Sounds great. I have another question. There's no more questions in the chat. More around your research group. I mean, I'm aware that you set it up within the last year or two.
Yeah.
So what are your aspirations for that research group? So I was interested to hear that it's sort of right across the university, but your university is creative arts. So do you have engineers, and do you have a whole range?
We have something close, and we will in future, because we're developing a brand new school of games and creative technology that's opening in the autumn. And we aim to get some games engineers and some creative coders and so on. At the moment, because we don't have an engineering school yet, or anything that teaches that, what we have is a range of people who are doing work that's on the edge of that. So we had, particularly in the architecture school, we have a lot of people doing creative coding and VR and product design and electronics. So we've got a lot of architecture people in the group, because somehow, I mean, I wouldn't on the surface have thought that those were topics of interest to architecture, but I've since discovered there's lots of architecture schools exploring these realms of electronics and so on. So I think somebody's trying to call me. Okay, never mind. So we have those people who are more on the technical side, but they're also really interested in the space of VR and volumetric capture and that kind of thing. So we have a core group of people coming from different places. We have someone whose background is in sort of traditional video art, and then he moved into digital media, now much more interested in 360 video. We have filmmakers who are interested in finding ways to upgrade their filmmaking background into something more, you know, immersive. We have traditional textiles people who are interested in the haptics of traditional textiles and how they can link into haptics of electronics. So we have a range, and then we have a number of brand new fashion PhD students who are interested in the connection between haptics, VR, and fashion. So yeah, because I mean, the funny thing about the University of Creative Arts is it's all arts, and what we're all doing in our departments is slicing off little bits of the pie and just into discrete disciplines, and in reality they're all sort of connected and overlapping in lots of interesting and different ways. And we've got, you know, fashion students really interested in doing virtual catwalks, and we've got, like I said, architecture students interested in that connection of space in VR. And so yeah, it's still growing and developing because we've all been really exhausted by the pandemic, and we've got a new agenda to develop 14 new courses in a new school. So we have not many researchers in the group. We have a lot of practitioners and some PhD students, myself, and maybe 2 other researchers. But our goal in the university is to keep being a way to cross these courses and disciplines and campuses. And so we've got this symposium coming up in the autumn as a means to do that. But we're also we're collaborating with University of Greenwich and with their digital design school of design, I think, and their digital design folks. And they're with Ghislaine Boddington, who's a reader in the school, but also has a long history of connecting body with the virtual. So we're trying to make it both supportive of our own in-house researchers and practitioners, but also opening it up to the public to explore different ways that we can talk about extending the body through technology.
Fabulous. And it's a great way, you know, it sounds like you're doing really well on the kind of interdisciplinary front within a university context, which is always a bit of a challenge.
Especially when you have campuses in different parts of the country.
Yeah. Well, Camille, that's been so fascinating. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed talking into the ether.
I hope that those,
I can assure you there have been people here.
those whose presence I couldn't feel, I hope they were able to feel my presence, and I was able to send it through the technology.
Okay, and a very special talk. Thank you from Brenda Miller.
Great, thank you all for whoever's here and whoever has been here, and whoever will see the video afterward. Thank you all for being here.
Lovely.
Thanks
Thank
so
you,
much,
Camille.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.